Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another webinar in our Benzene Agile series. And we as few of you know, that we do this. We try to do this almost every month, and pick topics of interest around agile adoption, around agile implementation, and run a very interactive webinar, keeping the practitioner's perspective in mind. Balagadesh, you can check few of the recordings of the previous webinars in our YouTube channel. We will share the link, as we go along. And Sujit, I think we can start. We can move to the next slide. This is the core of what we do. Benzene is a agile consulting company for people who are interested to know what an agile company does. We recently wrote a article, a blog on it, and I'm sharing the link of that blog with you so you can check. And at a very high level, this is a typical transformation journey, and we have been in past around 4 years, we have done around 14 plus transformation journeys across domains, across Indian organization, across global organizations, etc. And we would be glad to have a more in-depth discussion on any of the transformation bottlenecks that you might be facing in your organization. If that is the case, just give us a ping, and we'll be glad to connect. You can go to our website, www.benzene.com, and leave a message, and with a pertinent query, and we'll take it forward from there. Sujit, if you can move to the next slide. And trainings is, of course, a big part of consulting journeys. We typically mention to our clients, that agile transformation always flow in a know agile, do agile, and be agile, phased way. It starts with getting the basic parlance of agile consistent across the organization, across roles, across the various hierarchies, and then slowly building the basic awareness why you should be doing agile and what are the business outcomes, the business benefits of agile adoption, rather than following agile just for the heck of it. And then you slowly start building a particular rigor, cadence, discipline around agile practices, whatever the framework that you might be following, which is, it's very essential that the framework has to be contextual and suitable to your business environment, till the point of time, that you create self-organizing teams and you have a basic sustenance, stabilization, wherein agile becomes a part and parcel of your culture, mindset. And then, we say that the organization is in a being agile state. It's a long journey, and it's a continuous journey. And we, wish you all the best, in this journey. And the knowing part is a good start to start the journey. So these are the clients, that we have transformed over the years. Some, few of them are, transformation journeys, and while few of them, would be training clients. So you can check various case studies, that we our case studies in our web page. The link is given above. Coming to the topic for today, we will discuss about DOD and DOR, which will be facilitated by coaches, agile practitioners, Sujit and Sudha. Both Sujit and Sudha have extensive experience as practitioners. Please feel free to ask as many questions as you want. You can mention the questions in the chat window, and we'll try to take them whenever there is a logical break. That way, the continuity of the facilitator is also maintained. And yeah, so I think that's it. And we hope to have a very interactive session. And over to you, Sujit, Sudha. Take it forward. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, Alok, and thank you everyone for joining this webinar. I hope at the end of this webinar, we learn a little about what is DOD, what is DOR, and what are the anti-patterns, right? So that's going to be the topic for today, and what's in the plate for us today. When we talk about DOD, DOR, we would like to cover a few aspects pertaining to that. When do we derive them? What exactly is DOD, DOR, definition of done, definition of ready, and when do we derive them? And when we derive them, what are the few factors of the project which we consider, right? And we'll also run through a sample DOD DOR, which we hope should be a stepping stone for you if you don't have a DOD DOR implemented in your teams. So this is what we will be covering today. And as Alok mentioned, please keep it interactive. Please post all your questions on the chat window so that we can take one by one when we have logical break and then answer them. Right? So let's start. So this is what we're going to do today. We have a few questions which we come across when we are coaching teams or when we come across teams who have implemented Agile, right? By end of this slide, I have about 8 to 9 points. At the end of this slide, I request everyone to use the chat window and tell me if you all have faced these challenges or not, with just yes or no. Let's start. Any Agile implementation or any teams following Agile Scrum, any framework, right? Usually during the journey of the transformation, we come across a lot of challenges which we kind of overcome during the course of the time, right? Has anyone here in your team, or has anyone of you have complained that the stories which you have taken in the sprint was not complete? We didn't have enough details, or is your story one-liner? Yes or no? You might have to put that in the chat window. I'll keep that open as well. Yes, right. The next point, when you say, for example, you have taken some stories in the sprint. At the end of the sprint, did you all come across this statement made by your team, or you might have made it, that we couldn't complete because designs were not in place at the right time? Yes or no? Taking you forward. Next question. Have we started working on a story in a sprint without checking the technical feasibility because there was pressure of timelines? Yes or no? No, maybe yes, maybe no. Taking you all ahead. Have you all committed for a story in your sprint and not completed because there was a dependency and the dependent team couldn't resolve your dependency on time, because of which your story had to spill over to the next sprint? Yes, of course. Yes. Have you all, in your retrospectives, have your team complained to you all or the Scrum Master, telling the stories are too big to get completed in one sprint, we have to start breaking them? We couldn't complete. Yes. Okay. Another challenge which we face, or the teams face generally, is did your customer coming telling that yes, you have approved your story, yes, the testing is done, but still I am getting all these issues. How did we miss this? Yes or no? Possible, right? If you're a technical heavy team, have you all struggled to bring in best coding practices? We all understand we have sprints, we have timelines to complete. Yes. What about code review? What about automation? How do we bring in the process itself? Yes. Has your story not met coding standards? Even though your product owner says, yes, functionally I am good with this, the story, but what about 80% code coverage? Is that a standard which is set? Have you all faced this in your teams? Yes. Let me tell you honestly, my team, these are the few symptoms of agile teams who do not have a common understanding of when shall we pick up a work, when is the work item or a user story or an epic ready for us to be picked up. Or on the other hand, these are the symptoms of teams who do not have or who do not share a common understanding of when can we say a work is done, completed. You know, in your column, a story moved to the last column, done's column. When shall we do the what all do we have to take care? Now, these are the symptoms of teams which are not A, implemented DOD, DOR in your agile practices, or B, these are the symptoms of teams who are not following DOD, DOR in your sprints. What exactly is DOR? What exactly is DOD? Right? Taking you all ahead. Let's imagine now we want to build a house, right? When you want to build a house, there are certain aspects or certain criteria for us to meet without which we cannot even start our construction. What are those? Can you start your house without talking about the finance? I'm not talking about the entire finance, just enough finance is also fine. We cannot start. Finance is one of the important criteria for us to even start considering building a house. Who will build? Which architect are we giving it to? Which construction company are we giving it to? Right? That is something which we need to start, which we need to think and finalize before we even get into starting the construction. What to build? Are you building a bungalow? Are you building a 2-story building, 1-story building? The definition, the requirement has to be there. Material. You cannot just say that we will start building the house and then we will procure materials later. Yes, of course, it happens at a chunk, right? But without material, you cannot start. So there are few important criteria which we need, criteria or aspects of building a house which you need to consider before you even start working. Let's take up the same thing with respect to our IT or software industry, right? Can you start working without enough details, enough acceptance criteria? Do we have enough scenarios? Can we start? If you have designs, if you have backend teams in your project, can we start working without designs? Right? No. Can we start working without API contracts or API documents? No. Solution document? No, maybe not. Right? Has the team identified the solution? When do we have to finish in the sprint? How big is the work? Has the team estimated? Is there any enough non-functional requirement? Do we have to consider the performance? What are the dependencies? Do you have any external team who's maybe resolving your blockers? Dependencies? Are you dependent on external design teams or external backend teams? Right? So even when it comes to IT environment, like how we spoke about building a house, there are certain things which has to be done before we even start working on a requirement. Now, coming to definition of ready. Definition of ready is an artifact or a document which is usually in the form of checklist that is totally derived by all the stakeholders, dependent teams within the agile team, which contains bare minimum or important aspects of the project or the work items that needs to be taken care before we start any work item, be it a user story, be it an epic. So DOR is a checklist which we need to ensure everything is marked, which is derived by the entire team before we even bring up a story in the planning meeting. DOR is a common understanding. It brings everyone, be it your testers, be it your developers, your stakeholders, everyone come in a same understanding, same page as to what needs to be taken care before we even start working on a requirement, which is a user story or an epic. DOR is a checklist which needs to be checked, which will give confidence in the planning meeting for the team to even commit for the demo or for the delivery. So this is definition of ready. Taking you all ahead. Pete spoke about definition of ready. Let's take an example of the same building a house. When can you say a work item is done or completed, right? Let's take this example of a house. A plumber, when a plumber will say that his work or her work is completed when all the plumbing work is done in the house. Likewise, a carpenter will say, I am done with the work when all his carpentry, your wardrobe, your almirah, your tables are fitted in the house. A mason might tell, yes, the pillars are up, the bricks are laid, so my work is done. And an electrician, your fans, your lights are all fitted, so my work is done. Now, when is your house complete, but right? When all these people are together and they say the house is completed only when everything in the house, your taps, your lights, your fans, ACs, they're all working. You're able to open the wardrobe door. Only when all these things are done, your house is completed altogether. Again, let's map the same thing to with an IT or a software industry. We all know agile teams are cross-functional. When I say cross-functional, it is about having all the skill set available to complete one requirement into a working software. Now, for example, a developer may come and tell my work is done when we have coded. I have finished coding. But a QA will not say that. QA will say my work is done when I have tested and have logged all the bugs. Right? But there are other items. When is a user story completed? That's the question. So what happens? The teams usually come and derive something called as definition of done. All of us, including the stakeholders, the dependent team, if you have any security compliance to be taken care, they will be in the room, right? What are the performance which we expected? Is it matching your story? So when all these things are done, we can all together tell that the work or the user story or the epic is done. That checklist, my friends, is called definition of done. Definition of done is a document or a checklist which contains all the work, all the items or all the aspects of project which we need to take care as a team before moving a user story to the done state or moving an epic to the done state. Again, definition of done is a common understanding which brings all the stakeholders, the developers, the testers, the designers, everyone under the same understanding of when a user story can be marked as done. Right? This DOD ensures that everyone has the same understanding. You talk to a tester asking when a story is done. This checklist is one which a tester should refer. You ask anyone in the team should be able to tell, for us as a team, we will say the work is completed or the user story is marked done only when all the items in the definition of done is ticked. So this is what is definition of done. I'm taking a pause here. Any questions? Balaganesh?
If for a team, new team, like who's already been there, and if I joined as a scrum master, if they don't have definition of done, so should we do it? Should we have a collaborative discussion along with the team to decide on that, or should we just produce a document and make them to collaborate and come up with a final What's the best way to start?
Balaganesh,
Yeah.
how to derive, when to derive DOD, I will be explaining. But to answer your question in a crisp way, yes, I recommend you have a collaborative discussion with all the participants you need in your team, right? And then derive the DOD together so that everyone has the same understanding. But I will explain that in detail as we move on.
Perfect. Thanks. Thank you.
No worries. Now that we know what definition of done and what is DOR and what is DOD, can you bring in a certain practitioner's view as to what challenges you faced and how did DOR and DOD help the team into what aspects of the project?
Sure, Sujit. So, yeah, having heard about definition of done and definition of ready, let's see why it is actually needed and what are the benefits we can reap having a good DOD and DOR. I think that will answer a lot of questions that you guys have here. So first of all, as Sujit explained, it's a checklist. It's a checklist of what are the items to be there in place before you start work, just DOR, and before you end the work, what are the items that have to be in place to mark or to deem a story or a work item as complete. That is a basic skeleton of a DOR and DOD. So why do we need a DOR in the first place? Why do you have to have this checklist? You may be wondering. So most of the times, in my experience, or even you guys would have observed that teams go with an impression or with an assumption that, yeah, we are ready to execute. We can move the work item or the user story to the ready state. And then they go with an assumption, yeah, we have everything in place. User story is perfect. The story is designed. The information is captured. We are good to go. We're good to go in the sense the sprint planning has ended. We're good to execute. And that's when, once the execution starts in the work item or the user story, the teams tend to suddenly realize that there are certain gaps in understanding. There are certain gaps with respect to the dependencies that they're facing, challenges with respect to the complexities of the work item. They may also be struggling with how to take this forward, the implementation part around technicalities. Now, these gaps are identified during execution. Now, what happens typically is when they find the gaps, it's too late to come up with a clean solution. Now, when this happens, what does the team do? Team usually tries to make up for the time by coming up with the best effort basis on a best effort basis, or they might patch up things to finish the work, right, during execution to finish the work item. And what happens subsequently, you end up coming up with user stories in production, coming up with a lot of bugs and quality discrepancies. You'll also end up with issues with respect to the kind of coding they have made with respect to the on the user story or on the functionality. So why did this happen, right? If your definition of ready didn't have the common understanding, or it didn't capture what are the things that have to be in place before you agree upon taking it into a ready state, these kind of problems usually surface during execution. So what you should have done is you should have come to common understanding that, yes, we are dependent on API team, which is an external team. They're not part of our team. So let's get the sign off from them and ensure it is created, it is tested by the respective team and signed off before we take the user story into execution and integrate the respective API. And also, you would also have some kind of user stories. You would have realized, oh, user story is there in our sprint backlog, which got all information. And suddenly during execution, they realized not too many acceptance criteria have been captured, or it is not very clear. The information created in the user story is not clear. Or you might hear tech leads saying, oh, it's not a technically feasible solution. How did we even get it into execution mode? Now, what went wrong here? Before you got it into a ready state, there was no agreement between the tech leads and product owner on a technical feasible solution, whether this particular user story is technically feasible or not. Do we have the right framework for it? So you should have had that kind of a discussion. You should have captured, like, look, we need to also ensure, not just ensure user story has acceptance criteria and enough information, also check if it is technically feasible or not. So this brings in, or this ensures that everybody is on the same page with respect to taking the items from the readiness, or ensures that you are meeting all the readiness criteria before you take it into execution. So there are no two versions around what item is ready and what is not ready. So there's just one single checklist that you have to run. So this DOR becomes a baseline for everybody to move the item to a ready state. So as Sujit rightly pointed out, it is the common understanding. Secondly, the other thing that you need to also understand is no DOR is perfect. It's an evolving document. It's a live document. So what is the benefit of this? So there are scenarios that I've observed that although you would have had a perfect definition of ready created, right? Mid-sprint, you would have identified certain things. Oh, we missed out on this. We should have checked the wireframes before we brought it into the execution mode. So don't worry about it. Don't have to hassle around it. You just have to say, okay, let's look into this, how we can solve the problem in future sprints. Let's evolve this and capture our learnings and refine the definition of ready document. So that's how it gets refined. So the benefit is not just shared understanding, it's a evolving document, it's a live document which you can refer to. It's not a legal contract. It is a document created by the team members to come to a common agreement on what makes an item ready. So that's the benefit of having a DOR. So you would have heard in your project terms the word prerequisites have to be met before we start working. So yeah, those prerequisites also can be in your definition of ready. Something cannot be started without having this in place. So that thereby you are eliminating the risk of incompletion. Secondly, you would have also understood or heard in your project some external dependencies, internal dependencies. You want to map them out and have a run through it before you get into it. Again, what's the benefit of doing this? You're avoiding delays. You also know that this has been sorted. So you're confident to get the work started or get into a ready mode. That's one advantage. Now, why do we need to also have a definition of done when you have a definition of ready? Same thing. It is a checklist. It brings in people together and it allows people to have a shared understanding on when to take an item or a user story to a completed state. Now, I'll just give you an example here. I think, Sujit, you can also pitch in if there's anything that you have seen in your teams. You would have noticed that your user story has all the information. It's been demoed and product owner says, perfect, it is completed. And you are giving a demo to other stakeholders, external stakeholders like teams which are facing the actual customers. In a scenario like this, where a product owner is not facing the actual customer, you might have other teams, sales team, or other business teams facing the actual customers. When you demo it to them, they may say, oh, this is missing. This cannot be done. And what happens? Again, you come up with a rework and then the story is reopened. Now, to ensure you have a common understanding across the various stakeholders who are going to use this functionality, you would want to have this captured or run through various stakeholders and reach an agreement with respect to what makes an item or a work story complete. So thereby you are bridging the gap and bringing both the parties, internal stakeholders and external stakeholders, together to reach an understanding and close the work item as complete. The second scenario which I also observed is, although the story is completed, product owner has okayed it, everybody else has okayed it, it's gone into production. After a few weeks or probably months, you just see the story being reopened. Now you might wonder, why is it reopened? We adhere to the definition of done. There's no consistency here. You might be wondering, the reason it could have gone out that way and it could have brought in some production bugs is because while marking the story as complete, you would not have looked into the other elements, non-functional elements. You would have just gone through the functional requirements which have to be met as part of DOD. You would have closed it off. But then non-functional aspects, like Sujit was talking about compliance, right? Quality, non-functional elements like reliability or resilience, those aspects would not have been addressed. You would have missed out when you captured or when you completed the functionality. So DOD not only gives a shared understanding of when to mark it complete, it also helps you to run through the various elements which can make a user story or a work item complete. Now you may be wondering, how does it promote consistency? By repeating the same exercise again and again, you are definitely improving the quality, and this becomes really, consistency leads to excellent quality. Now, the other advantage, whether it's a DOD, formulating a DOD or a DOR is, you see the point there, cross-team collaboration. You might wonder why or how a cross-team collaboration can be brought in. To answer Bala's question, when you are formulating DOD and DOR, and if you want to reap the benefits of DOD, DOR, bring everybody who is part of the story or who's part of the functionality while formulating the DOD or DOR. If you're starting a team afresh, or if you're starting a project afresh, or midway in your agile transformation, you still have to ensure everybody comes together and says, yes, in my view, this item is ready to go into execution state. In my view, the story is completed only when it meets the compliance aspects as well. In my view, the story can be completed. The release team might come back and say, yes, all the issues have to be fixed before I can say as a closure or a done state for this particular user story. So have everybody come together. Now, by doing so, you are increasing cross-team collaboration. Everybody is on the same page, same understanding. And another benefit, the beautiful benefit out of a DOD and DOR is you are having these kind of discussions with your team. Teams are your developers, your QA, your product owners, Scrum Master. You'd also want the other participating teams. For example, if you're getting your API built by another team, you would want them also to participate because they need to know when a story for you is ready. What should they be doing for them to hand it over to you before you can take it to a ready state? So have them also in these discussions, okay? And formulate your DOR and DOD. It is not set in stone. Only with discussions you can evolve or you can modify your DOD and DOR to suit your needs. Now, there's another thing that I would like to point out here is you'd have noticed, as Sujit was mentioning, you'd have noticed that developers keep saying, oh, my job is done. The user story from my end is completed. Now it is with the QA for testing. So they are testing it, only then it will be done. Testers would have confirmed, yes, we are done, but then it's still pending review, but we are done with the story. Now, what do you see when they see, what are the vibes that you get when you hear such statements? We have Scrum Masters or product owners, I'm sure you share the same experience. The experience or what these kind of statements convey is we are operating in silos. You have to recognize, your Scrum Master sitting in this webinar, you must recognize that, oh, we are operating as one team, but where is the shared goal? We are all only talking about our work. So when you come together as a team and you formulate your definition of done, you're telling a work item or a story is not complete until we have gone through the various steps of DOD or various area of a DOD. So when you're doing this, you're inculcating a one team mindset. You will naturally see that the teams are working, or the team members of the team are working more closely, and the teams are have a better one team mindset than before if you have these kind of discussions with the team. So these are few of the benefits. Again, these are not legal bindings. I would want to emphasize that these are living documents. These are nothing but your working agreements. You would have heard social agreements, right? When should you come? How should you come on to meeting? What should you do in meetings? So similarly, we have working agreements. When should you want to take the story to a ready? When do you want to take it to a done? These are nothing but working agreements which have a lot of benefits. But if you want to reap the benefits, you have to reach a consensus. You have to bring in right participation before, during, or after the project. Now, I just want to ask Sujit. Sujit, are there any other benefits that you can think of? Or any anti-patterns when we create or formulate DODs and DORs?
Yes, Sudha. So benefits, I think you covered most of your points, but I would like to bring in certain anti-patterns or concerns when team implement DOD, DOR, right? The first anti-pattern, as you kept mentioning, is the DOD, DOR being very rigid, right? When the moment we formulate DOR, DOD, it's done. Now everyone should follow that, and there's no room for innovation anymore because it's totally rigid, right? The second one is the ignorance towards DOD, DOR, right? So quite often we see teams ignoring DOD, DOR, where Scrum Master just ticks everything, even though things are not met according to what criteria they've met. That is one of the things. And the third and most important anti-pattern which I come across my team, certain of my teams are, once a DOD or DOR is formulated, right, they don't revisit, okay, and everything is stagnant, right? So the biggest concern there is, Sudha and everyone, see, a process or a framework set during the initial stages of project may not be valid after 6 months or 7 months of the project, because we would have evolved a lot, or we would have learned a lot, because of which we have to relook at the process itself. So the moment the teams don't revisit their DOD, DOR, and a very rigid and a lengthy list of items to be taken, right? So these are the few anti-patterns which I observe. Coming to this part, Sudha, when do we actually derive DOD and when do we iterate them, right? So everyone.
Before that, Sujit, I just have one more question for you and for the team. This is what I've seen, Sujit. Since we are talking about the benefits, and you said we have formulated, and it should not be very rigid. Yeah, in my experience, what I've seen, I would like to share with the team and with everyone here, and you can also pitch in what you have done in such kind of scenarios. Is yes, in a transformation which we took, which we participated, which we intervened, notice that definition of ready and done is beautifully there in a Confluence page published, and everybody had viewed it. But then, when it comes to closure of the items, it is coolly forgotten.
Right.
Second scenario I would like to throw is definition of done and definition of ready are in place. Everybody is following, but many of the times, as per the definition of done, it says certain issues, P3, P4 issues cannot be closed, are existing, or P2 issues are there, but we still close the story, right? Code review was not conducted. Yeah, but it was conducted only after the team had tested it. Why did you do that? If the question was raised, they'd say, no, we just did it because anyway, it's there in the checklist. One way or the other, we have to do it. We did the code review, but after the testing. So what do you think we should be doing there? I mean, I've done something in my teams. I've ensured these things don't happen. In your experience, what have you done if you face these kind of situations? What have you done?
So it's a pretty valid scenario as well, right? So a straightforward solution maybe that is, so even though DOR, DOD is a collective decision taken by the entire team, right? I think what can work here is maybe the Scrum Master emphasizing on checking the DOR before the sprint starts for all the stories or epics, and also ensuring that DOD is met before we even take the stories for the demo in the review meeting, right? So a little nudge for the Scrum Master, though we understand it's a team's a collective decision to derive these. A Scrum Master should be able to enforce DO or DOD within the team. That's what my take here is.
Yeah, I mean, if the Scrum Master guys is not able to do it, you know where to go to. You have to have a leadership buy-in, or somebody higher in the ring has to say that, okay, we have to adhere to every line of DOD. You cannot jump or go beyond what's there in DOD. No decision can be taken in consensus. So yeah, certain times it gets very difficult in my experience for a Scrum Master to enforce the DOD. So one suggestion would be, I think, Sujit, is take it up and see if somebody can bring that to the team,
Right.
Convey the information that you have to meet if the Scrum Master is not empowered enough. This happens initially in the initial phases of the Agile transformation. Scrum Master also will not be empowered enough.
Thanks to that, Sujit. There are a few questions, that are pending up. So let's take them up. And I think Ashish is asking, I think one part you have already answered, but let me just read it out. DOD needs to have a document, and who creates the document? If we can just have a very short answer, because we have other questions as well.
Right. If you're using any tools like Jira, Ashish, you can configure a custom field called as DOD DOR, which can be a checkpoint kind of a list. And that has to be monitored and managed by the Scrum Master.
Does that answer your question, Ashish?
So you're saying that Scrum Master is a document owner. He creates a document for DOD, right?
Correct.
When we say definition of done, so the team who like participate on the document are Scrum Master and the development team.
Right. Because
development team is like working on the task, working on that current sprint, and they know that is that completed, and say they work with the Scrum Master, and then Scrum Master creates a DOD document, right, along with the development team.
Yes, Ashish. So when you talk about stories, everyone has that responsibility, but Scrum Master should be able to check if all the stories have met DOD before we take to the demo, as you mentioned. Yes.
Thanks, Sujit. I think that answers Swati's question as well. And Abhishek has a question. So if a question mark is signed off, I believe that is what he meant. So we can consider it as DOD, or we need to involve internal stakeholders and have the check on all checklist and then mark it as DOD. Sujit, Sudha, let me know if you understand that. Understood
Yeah.
that. Otherwise, Abhishek, you can clarify.
So I think Abhishek is asking if the QA has signed it off as done, do you still have to mark it as DOD? So as per your DOD, if you say that QA has, I think you meant quality guys. If quality people have tested it and no bugs found, it goes to the next person, right? As per your workflow. The product owner has to also look into it. You have to give a demo to you, give a demo of the user story. And if they don't find bugs and if it's as per the functionality, product owner will say it is closed. But if you also have some of the stakeholders in other scenarios, wherein you also have to have a commercial team look at the overall picture, the aesthetics, the design, the color, and all of that. Even they have to be there to call it as done. Then they also have to mark it as done. So depending on how you had your user story design, you have to have those participants mark off as done to take the entire story to completion. Yeah, I hope that
Sure.
answers the question.
Thanks,
Yes.
Sudha.
Hello, can we continue and maybe take the
Yeah,
question?
yeah.
Just one more question. I think I don't know if that is how you pronounce your name, but you raised your hand, so you can
Yeah,
go ahead.
I had a
and
question. So, what if, for example, the customer need is not precise enough to write the DOR? So, is it possible to integrate a rework stage, or meaning planning a reopening of the user story because it's more likely to happen?
Yudis, I'm sorry, I quite didn't follow you. If your question is, if the customer is not very clear about the requirement, how do we derive the DOR? Is that right?
Yes, but what if you cannot write it? What if you are unable to derive it? Is it possible to make some hypothesis, write or derive I would say a detail enough DOR to proceed, but we integrate the fact, the risk that we have a rework, and so we plan to reopen the user story. I don't know if this is clear.
Right, Yudis, I think I got your question. So when it comes to customer requirements, it's called acceptance criteria along the story, right? So that is where, in terms of functional acceptance, we have a checklist of what all we need to take in terms of story. But when you talk about DOR and DOD, is more of the practice or the process level checklist, which we will be considering here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when it comes to, for example, as a user, I must be able to log in so that I want to use the system as a requirement, right? So there comes your functional acceptance. And if you're facing a problem there, that's a different question, right? So when you talk about DOR, it's more of a process related, or all the items which we need to take care as a team, right?
Okay.
For all the stories, not only acceptance criteria is story specific, whereas
Okay.
DOR, DOD is common for all the stories.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I
Thanks.
don't know, did that answer your question?
Yeah. Understood.
Thanks. Sujit, Sudha, we have 30 minutes left. So let's rush with the subject matter at hand. And participants, if there are any further questions, just keep on mentioning them in the chat window. We are okay to spend time beyond the stipulated 7:15 end time as well, and we'll stay here to answer all the questions. Go ahead, Sujit.
Thank you so much. Look, so team, everyone, we spoke about one thing, which is the teams not able to pay attention towards reiterating DOR and DOD. But when the question is, when do we even derive the DOD and DOR for a team, for a project, and when do we start iterating them? Any agile project goes through this phase where we have the pre-game or initiation, which is usually called as discovery phase of the project, where we are deriving the backlog itself, and then we get into execution, which is nothing but sprinting. Every sprint we take the backlog, finish it, take the backlog, finish, and there's a post game, which is a closure. So DOR and DOD is ideally derived before we start the sprinting, that is in the initiation or discovery phase, is when everyone is together and they derive DOD and DOR. But as I told you all, it is the process or the framework which is set may not hold good. We also reiterate the process every now and then after the retrospective is done. We collect the information from the retro, what is working, what is not working, what has to be improved. Likewise, after every sprint, before we start the next sprint, we also relook at DOD and DOR to make necessary changes which will help us in the future sprints. So deriving, yes, in the pre-game before we start the sprint one. And every sprint after the retro, we look at DOD DOR to see if that is still valid or we need to change it. So this is when we derive and iterate over DOD and DOR. Another question. So the deriving DOD DOR, yes, it happens in the pre-game initiation and discovery phase. But can you throw some light on what to consider to even derive DOR and DOD?
Yeah, this is what we need to bear in mind. Okay, so DOD, DOR, as I mentioned, the Sujit, right, and the team, they're not set in stone. So first understand what kind of project you're working with. Certain teams, they might be working with where there might be you might have a team working on the back end or the APIs. Okay, and these might not be part of your Agile team or your Scrum team. They might be an external team, or you'd have outsourced the work to somebody else. If that's the case, you should have those items ready as part of your DR before you can actually start integrating those APIs into your user story. So having discussions, see these kind of discussions around what kind of a project it is, what is it heavily dependent upon? Are we heavily dependent on external teams, for example, API teams, or have we outsourced our design work to another party and are we dependent on those external teams? If that's the case, to start making your user story functional and to get it to a potentially shippable state, okay, what are the aspects that have to be addressed before we start executing? That has to be discussed. So basically, on the nature of the project, nature of work involved within your functionality is one thing you have to figure out before you even formulate your DOR. The other thing is, there will be teams wherein, for example, you might have started your project. This is another example. You might be sprinting 1, 2, and 3, and mid of the project you'd have realized we have a lot of APIs to be created. In that case, the API work is anyway outsourced, or you have another team working around it. Okay, we don't need anybody within the team to do that work. But certain times your contract with them would have ended, and you're still sprinting, and you might face the problems with the API that they've already created. In that case, you might have to source some of the people from other teams as well. If that's the case, you might have to have them ready to onboard into your existing running sprint. So if to onboard them, you must get sign-offs from the relevant departments on who are taking care of the resource management, and you can take care of how their work has to be managed. So that kind of discussions around resources also have to be done if you're dealing with people working within a team, and if you're sourcing skills from other teams. So these discussions will help you tailor your DOD. It's not just about this has to be there, user story, acceptance criteria it should be there, or we should have identified dependencies. Not just those, but these things also will help you formulate your DOR. Along with that, you want to take up the next anything else apart from this DOR, Sujit?
Yeah. So see, nature of project and skills involved need to be considered when you're deriving your DOR, but also the requirements itself, right? Say, for example, if you're working for any the health domain, medical domain, or if you're working on any banking domain where securities or any compliance kind of a thing is a must for all the features you build or for all the user stories, you might as well add your compliance or non-functional requirement within the user story itself. Say, for example, if your non-functional requirement is not mentioned in the story, we won't be able to start working on that, right? So the nature of requirement itself, right? So if you're working for any SEZs or any compliance specific or security specific, you might as well talk about the structure of your requirement. How should be your structure? What should be in your acceptance criteria? What all security scenarios you should mention? What all testing, like for example, SAST and DAST, which we do for security penetration testing, should that be done? So so nature of your requirement or your nature of the requirement structure itself is one of the aspects you need to consider before you write your DOR. And again, as you mentioned, Sudha, it's a dependent team, right?
Yeah.
If you have multiple teams working in the same project, right? When do you, for example, design should be ready even before we start the working. API contract should be ready, right?
To add to this, Sujit, there was a situation when we had external teams working, and yes, they said, okay, we have done with our work. The teams had signed off, had confirmed that the APIs are done, designs are ready. Then when they get into execution, you notice that they're not fitting very well. The designs are not what you've asked for. So these things keep happening. Although the checklist Scrum Master would have ticked off saying that API is there, ready, design is there, ready, and the story can move into ready part. Have you all even check to see if they're functioning? So you want to write a clear statement, readied and signed off, ready, tested or signed off. Now these things will come to light only when you have a discussion. Is it just enough to have it ready, or is it should be signed off, or should it have been tested before it's given to you and signed off? These kind of sign offs are also very important as part of DORs, is what I would like to add here.
Right.
Especially
So,
when you're dealing with external teams and you have no control over them.
right, Sudha, exactly. So a similar thing with DOD as well, right? So how do you, what all do you consider when you are deriving your DOD? Again, nature of your project. Let's take an example here, right? If your projects are involving a hardware, you're building a software to integrate with hardware, and all the features are for the hardware. It has to be tested on hardware, right? Only when testing on the hardware is done, the story is complete, right? So nature of your project is one of the important aspect when you are deriving your DOD and DOR, right? And as I mentioned, your domain, your organization or coding standards. Say if you are very backend heavy and you're very particular about your code quality, right? And you want 90% of code coverage or no code coverage to be done, right? And they have, you use some tool called like Sonar Cube and everything, and the passing mark has to be beyond 95, right? So if your organization or if your team or if your domain needs some specific standards like this, you might as well, and it is common to all the stories mostly, you might as well add that in your DOD, right? And as I mentioned, business and functional requirements as well, the structure of the requirement, right? Based on your domain, based on your project, type of project which you're working, right? See, quality is another aspect when you're kind of deriving your DOD. What is your leeway about quality? How much quality is good quality for you? Are you okay with all the P1, P2 issues open, or you need, are you okay with, say, minor issues being still okay? We can go ahead with the delivery. What is your tolerance towards quality, and what are your standards towards quality? Although should the testing be automated, right, for that story? So these are the few aspects which you also consider when you're deriving your DOD. So, anything you want to add?
Yeah, since you said the testing, that's a very important aspect with respect to quality. See, there are a lot of times when you don't close the story because it was not tested or using automation tool, and the story remains open. So in that case, you'd have figured out the DOD that it has to be tested and automated, and you should have done automation testing along with the manual if you had anything like that. But because of the time constraint, you feel that you're unable to undertake those activities, and the story remains open. So it's time for you all to tailor your DOD and adjust, saying that, okay, every 2 sprints we can automate, but current sprint, since we don't have the bandwidth, let's only do the actual manual testing or the other kinds of testing which are relevant to the team size, and take the automation for future sprints. So that kind of a DOD also can be captured, keeping in mind what levels of testing you want on a story. Again, after you're done with 3 or 4 sprints, revisit and see, okay, these things need not be done now. Let's only stick to automation. Everything has been captured. So how is your test suite being created, and what levels of testing, how many test cases? Based on that, also you can have your DOD tailored. And non-functional requirements, as Sujit, you said, we can have non-functional requirements as part of acceptance criteria. But then there are a lot of times when the team is unable to complete a story because they are not able to finish or finish the work on the non-functional aspects of it. In that case, take that out and have it as another story or a spike. You know, the non-functional requirements can go as a different stories, and keep this story, keep it functionally working. The non-functional part can be addressed later. So those things also can be, those aspects can be looked into, and your DOD can be tailored accordingly. Right? Anything else on NFR you want to add, Sujit? Or
No, Sudha, I think that's pretty much it. Maybe what we can do is, Sudha, everyone, let me walk you all through a sample DOD DOR, right? I think you all will get a little more understanding of what, right? So if I implement this sample DOD DOR in my team, none of the stories or none of the work will get started with work until business value is clearly defined in the story. Story fulfills invest, that is, story can be completed in one sprint. Acceptance criteria is well defined in the story. NFR is clearly mentioned. So these are talking about the structure of the requirement. Talking about the dependencies. Dependencies are identified and resolved. Design assets are attached in the story. These are talking about the artifacts being ready. Story is estimated. Story is refined. So these are talking about the awareness already before we start the work. So for me, if I implement this DOR in my team right now, until all these things are met for each and every story, that story will not come in the sprint backlog for me. Before, or let me put it the other way, before a story, to come into the sprint backlog for my team in a sample DOR, all these points should have been covered. All these things, and the Scrum Master, along with the team, should ensure everything is ticked. That is when a story can be moved to sprint backlog. Likewise, a DOD, when will a story be completed by the team? When will the story be marked to done? Again, it's a sample. For me, acceptance criteria is met in the working software. Story is tested. It is demoed to the PO and approved. No open P1, P2, high priority critical issues are open. I am still okay. We as a team have decided, even if there are no P1, P2, we can still live with 3 or 5 open low priority issues. We can still move the story to done. Peer review is of the code is done. Unit testing has 85% coverage. Tests are automated and passed. Code is merged in the branch. All story related tickets are updated in the tool. That means all the tasks are closed within the story in Jira or Azure or whichever tool you're using. Story is UAT approved. All APIs must respond within 3 seconds. So this is a classical DOD point for an NFR, right? If you are backend heavy, if you're building only, your stories are only building APIs, right? And all you need quick response. You might as well benchmark it within the DOD. So for us, if I implement this DOD in my team, none of the stories will go to the done column or the last column until all these points are checked and met. So this is everyone a sample DOR, DOD. This is where you can start, right? And maybe evolve for your teams as well.
Yeah, because
So
many of the times UAT approved. Maybe you may not even have a UAT approval running sprint in a sprint duration, whether it's 2 weeks or 3 weeks. So this need not be there, or this can be captured as a release level DOD. Yeah.
So everyone, this is all about DOD and DOR. Now I think we'll take some questions. Hello?
Yeah. So meanwhile, Sujit, if you can move to the next slide as also. Yeah. So we are now open to questions, everyone. And before that, a small request. It takes a lot of effort to put these webinars together. So, please encourage us, show us some encouragement. We would want you to scan this QR code and leave a feedback on the today's session. And, you can do that while we are taking more questions, but please spread some good karma. I am also mentioning a blog that we wrote some time back on the DOD and DOR. It's called Meet the Two Brothers. It will prove, I think, very beneficial for people interested more on the topic. And again, a small request, please do leave a review. It means a lot to us. And if we have to continue to do this webinar, we need this encouragement from your side. With that, we are open to questions. And I think the first question, Sujit Sudha, is DOD also applicable to SIT environment?
System integration testing, correct? Yes. Yes. So a DOD DOR is across environments here. Okay. Say for example, Alok, who's this question? Who asked this question? Sorry.
It's me, Ashish.
Ashish. Yes, Ashish. Let's say your story has to be developed, tested in QC environment, then move to QA or pre-prod for SIT. I'm just giving an example here for integration testing, right? And then go to UAT. Now your DOD can have a point telling that a story is completed only when SIT is done and UAT is approved. You understood, right? Did you get this point?
All right, thank you. So it's what I understood, it is all across all the environments.
Right.
It's not specific to any environment. So
It is
any
not.
environment, it is flexible to all environments.
Yes, Ashish. Basically,
Okay.
it is when do you say a story is done?
Okay.
Yeah. It should not be like you're giving a half-baked stuff, you know, it should be readily usable by the users. So if the story has to go through SIT, then with the right discussions, do you want to include it within your DOD is the question you have to ask your team, right? Or do you want to keep it separately? Based on how you want to deem it as complete, you'd want either include it or leave it outside. So you have to ask that question to yourself.
Okay.
Do I give a half-baked product? Yeah.
Just like clarification. So when you talk about DOD, so does that mean like the functionality or the whatever the business case we are like the development team has created, that is now productionized, or only the development is done?
What was the word you used?
When we talk about development of done,
Okay.
does that mean that piece of functionality is productionized, meaning that is in the production,
Okay.
or that's only in the development? So when we mark that in the storyboard.
Right. So how is your storyboard is the first question to be asked. Okay. Did you formulate your storyboard as the last column as production complete?
No, that's my question, because I don't have that.
It depends. So it's the ultimate aim to have a DOD in place is the story when completed, whichever aspect, it should be potentially shippable. It should be at least move into production and some form of usability should be there. So to get to that stage, what are the aspects that have to be in place? So in certain environments, we have noticed that yes, it has to get a UAT approval to deem it as completed. Certain cases, no, it's just that closure, all bugs fixed, and then you call it.
So Sudha, on that particular storyboard, do we have those swim lanes where we identify where right now, is it in the QA, or is it in the pre-prod, or is it in the SIT, or is it in the UAT? So
if you have designed your board from QA, where should it move next after getting it demoed? Where does the story land next? Yes, that should be visible on your story. That should be visible on your Jira board. Otherwise, moving it to the last column, if that's the end of a story to be completed at that point in time, then you would call it as a done there, because you might have X number of stories coming together to make a functionality complete. Here we're talking about one story to take it to completion. Right? You'll have to probably work with other stories or other smaller functionalities to make it usable. So if that's the case, those things may not be on your storyboard. Does it answer your question?
Okay. Okay.
You want to?
No, so that you covered it.
Yeah.
Yes.
So one more question, Sudha. So when we talk about DOD, is it specific to Kanban or sprint planning, like in the Scrum, or it is Scrum Ban, like your? So or it's all across.
It is framework agnostic, Ashish.
Okay. So okay.
It's just like this, Ashish.
Yeah.
I have a piece of work which I've given to my team to complete, and for completion, it has to go through various other teams or various other aspects. Now, when can I call it as complete? Only when everything has fallen in place, I will say it as complete. So I give a typical example of my maid coming. I keep using this example quite often. Your maid comes in, she cooks in for you and your food is ready, but she leaves. Next day you're completing, or late in the evening you're completing. What about the worktop, man? She hasn't even cleaned it. What do you say? Do you say my food is complete? That's enough? Or you say my worktop also has to be completed? It's not her fault. You should have discussed with her. When the work is complete, I want the food to be transferred to the serving bowl, worktop cleaned, and leave everything in the refrigerator. Only then I'll call it as complete. Now that's the discussion you should have had. So that's your definition of done. Similarly, she'll ask you, you did not get any vegetables. How can I even cook? You should have had that ready before your work starts. That's the definition of done. In simple terms, you're not relating it to any framework or Scrum or a Kanban. Certain things that have to be in place for something to be completed. Now, what are those certain things is the discussion that you need to have.
So, Sudha, we are clear on like a definition of done for a particular team. There is a like straightforward who are the stakeholders, like product owner, Scrum Master, and the development team. So, how does this definition of done work when we work in a cross-functional teams? When we have more than one team.
Okay.
Shall I take that, Sudha?
Yeah, please go on.
Yeah. So Ashish, if both the teams are working in the same project, same environment or same setup, right? If they're working, say for example, if you're building an Amazon app, right, and both the teams are working on Amazon with a shared goal, right? Then there's always a possibility of using the same DOD DOR. However, if there are multiple teams working on multiple projects, multiple domain, all the aspects which we mentioned, right? Then you cannot use your common DOD DOR. You might have to derive DOD DOR for both the teams separately based on their needs.
Okay.
Yeah. So you have to ask a question before I hand it out to another team. What should be there in place for me to hand it over? A completed item. It may not be a functionality, but probably your API. If you're building an API in your team, but you're handing it over to another X team, what makes an API item or user story complete? That you'll have to ask and create a DOD for yourself. And they will have the DOR ready to take it into their team.
So I think Bala has a question as well. Bala, if you can probably unmute yourself and go ahead and ask.
Sure, thank you. So yeah, my question is like I recently joined a new organization, and what's the right time for me to initiate a collaborative discussion along with the entire team for drafting the DOR and DOD? Can I do it as part of any ceremony, or should it be altogether a different event for this purpose exclusively?
Bala, I think it's up to your convenience of the team, to be very honest. But if you want to utilize any ceremonies, like for example, refinement meeting, or even retro or planning, right? You can utilize it, no worries. There's no special or dedicated meeting needed unless it is needed in your team dynamic, right? If your team is too busy, you want to focus on only the ceremonies part, and you want to do it in a separate meeting, you can do it. It's your convenience actually, and the team's convenience.
Sure, yeah, thanks, Sujit, because here the team is pretty new and they're now just in the forming stage. So that's what I just asked there.
What about the project, Bala? Is it starting now, or is it?
It's been already there for I think past 1.5 to 2 years. Yeah. So
Bala, in that case, I think once this current sprint is ending, you can maybe quickly get your DOD DOR in place.
Yeah, thank you, Sujit. Thanks a lot.
And Bala, so are they following any DOR DOD before that? Did you check with them?
I just went across some of the documentation. Yeah, they have in place, but they're not even following. Some of them are not even aware that they have DOR DOD.
No, before you're planning for this meeting or any event, so ask them what exactly the definition of ready means, how they are considering the story into the sprint. So ask them what exactly they are following. So first of all, you want to find out the pulse, what they are following. Then after that, you have to arrange a meeting and you have to prepare a definition of ready or a checklist, definition of done checklist. So how exactly they are moving? What is the criteria they are following the story is moving to done. So you had to follow, or first of all, check, have a meeting with the team and find out the things. Then after that, you can, if they are following as a existing checklist for DOR, DOD, then you can add if you add additional items. Otherwise, you can follow the same.
Sure, Hari. As of now, it's random. They're not following anything as such. So I need to coach them, giving the importance of these two things and have a collaborative discussion. Yeah.
Okay.
Sure. Thanks, Hari. Thanks, Sujit.
No worries.